Continuing debate, l'honorable député de Châteauguay.
The Honourable Member for Châteauguay-Lacolle. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I will be splitting my time with the Honourable Member for Hull-Aylmer. Mr. Speaker, I'm rising today because I'd like to explain to my colleagues here in the House and to my constituents why I am supporting this motion. The purpose is to declare a public order emergency under the Emergencies Act. Now, Canada is under rule of law, and by declaring this measure, we are respecting the Canadian law by acting within the parameters set by the law, which was put in place in 1988 by the Mulroney government. And it clearly sets out the criteria under which a public emergency order can be declared. The government feels that it meets this criteria, and that's why we want to act. The Emergencies Act contains a number of criteria, such as parliamentary oversight, and that is why we were here until midnight on Thursday, and that's why we're here again early this morning at 7 a.m. Mr. Speaker, all the measures taken under this Act have respected the Charters of Rights and Freedoms. Now, these measures are time-limited, targeted, and geographically focused, and they are proportionate to the threats to which they must respond. It is used to support police forces at all levels and across the country. Like we saw yesterday on Wellington Street, when the police forces were finally able to undertake a cordon and clear operation. The following 6 measures were put in place to control the situation. Regulate and ban public assembly that go against peace, and that's what we have seen in Ottawa and on the Ambassador Bridge. Those are not legal protests. We're trying to secure places through barricades, including essential infrastructure such as bridges, compelling people to provide public services to mitigate the impact of these blockades. For example, tow trucks with compensation. Authorize and oblige financial institutions to provide essential services to mitigate the impact of the blockades, for example, by regulating and banning the use of financial resources to support these blockades, allowing the RCMP to respect municipal bylaws and provincial offences as needed, and imposing fines as needed. With these measures, this is to ensure Canadians' safety, protect their jobs, and reinstate trust in our institutions.
Mr. Speaker, as established in 1988 by the Mulroney government, the Emergencies Act also contains a number of limits, control mechanisms, and significant guarantees. As the Act requires, a number of times last week, the Prime Minister and members of Cabinet consulted with the provincial premiers and members of their respective governments. Having declared a public emergency, we tabled the declaration in Parliament. In the days to come, a parliamentary committee will be formed to oversee actions during the period of the declaration. The declaration lasts for 30 days unless it is renewed. That having been said, the government can also, and personally I hope that this will be the case, revoke that much earlier. Parliament also has the ability to revoke the Emergencies Act as indicated in the law. It can modify or revoke any decree put in place under the Act. Those must be tabled in Parliament for 2 days for examination by parliamentarians. Mr. Speaker, one might ask How did we get to this point? Why is a declaration of a public emergency necessary? It's sad, but it was necessary. And Canada is a country that has always been a beacon for freedom and social peace around the world, as well as for democracy. I can't speak for what happened in Ottawa or the lack of interest from the government of Ontario when it was clear that authorities in Ottawa weren't able to face the threat of the protesters here on Wellington Street. Despite the clear fact that the municipalities, which are creatures of the province, are the responsibility of the province, the Ford government delayed its interventions and only acted when there were protests in Windsor and elsewhere in Ontario. I think there will be elections here soon, and it will be up to the voters of Ontario to decide how they will judge their provincial elected representatives. As a federal elected representative, Mr. Speaker, I'm particularly concerned about what's happening here in the House. What can I, as a simple backbencher, do? Well, since the beginning of these so-called freedom demonstrations, I've seen that there are members in this House who have used these protests, which have become an occupation and an attempted insurrection, to... I wonder if there's somebody who is filming me right now. Mr. Speaker?
Asking whether someone's filming, so I know I'm looking at the honourable member for he's just typing, okay, I'm guessing bad eyes, so therefore you have to keep it up close. Okay, perfect. Okay, well,
The honourable member for Châteauguay-L'École. Thank you. And they used these protests, which rapidly became an occupation and an attempted insurrection, for their own partisan gain. And it led, among other things, to the firing of the leader of a political party. And when these members had their photos taken with protesters or next to flags with racist messages, they claimed either that they didn't know or, even worse, that it wasn't a big deal. The denial and the minimization of these actions was deliberate and flagrant, while at the same time their tweets encouraging protesters gave credibility to the organizers who had their own sinister agendas. Mr. Speaker, I can continue with examples of this because it's this kind of thing which leads to division. And professionals in partisan tactics, and there are some here in this House, are very aware of that. It's their strategy to divide Canadians, Mr. Speaker, because they think that they can benefit from that division. These members should feel shame, Mr. Speaker. They're ready to put our safety, our economy, and our democracy in danger for their own partisan gain, for their political careers. And, maybe Fox News will ask them for an interview. Wow. Once again, Mr. Speaker, I agree with our government that there is a public emergency caused by these ongoing blockades put in place by people and vehicles across the country. And these blockades have a direct link to activities which promote violence against people and property, including essential infrastructure, with the goal of meeting a political or ideological objective in Canada. I agree that there has been a terrible impact on Canada's economy, and there have been threats to the safety of Canadians caused by the blockades of our essential infrastructure, particularly, the commercial area of Ottawa and the border crossings. And this has had a major impact on supply chains, and it has caused a problem with Canada's trading partners, particularly the United States. Given this state of emergency, and with the greatest prudence, our government declared a public emergency and has implemented the Emergencies Act, and now Canadians from across the country can trust that we will respect peace, order, and good government in this country. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Questions and comments
The honourable member for Barrie Innes.